the skies over Iran. Recently, they turned into a real combat zone.
Not just drills.
No, absolutely. We're talking Israeli stealth jets reportedly flying, well, pretty much unhindered through Iranian airspace. It sounds like something out of a movie, honestly.
It really does. High-stakes stuff.
But it was very real, and the ripple effect across global geopolitics is truly fascinating. This is a deep dive. It's all about understanding that recent Israeli air campaign against Iran, right?
Operation Rising Lion, they called it.
Rising Lion, yes. And the surprising, maybe shocking ineffectiveness of Iran's air defenses against it. And then, perhaps even more surprising, this whole revelation about a critical advanced air defense system, the S-400, that Russia refused to supply to Iran, its own ally.
That's the twist, isn't it?
It really is. So we're going to pull insights from a recent article on BulgarianMilitary.com published just yesterday, July 1st, 2025, alongside some other reports, official statements, the usual mix.
Got it.
Our mission, really, to get to the bottom of why Russia said no. What does that signal for the Middle East? And ultimately, why should you care about this distant conflict over hardware?
Because it matters. These decisions, who gets what weapons, they reshape things.
Exactly. They reshape alliances, they can trigger arms races, fundamentally alter power balances, and that has global implications for stability, for security. So let's jump right in.
Okay. Well, what's truly striking here, as you mentioned, is the sheer scale and precision of this Operation Rising Lion. It kicked off June 13th, 2025, lasted 11 days.
11 days. That's a sustained campaign.
It is. And the targets were very specific. Iran's nuclear facilities, yes, but also its critical air defense infrastructure. The Israeli Air Force, they apparently deployed over 200 aircraft.
Wow.
Including their top-tier stuff. The F-35I ADR stealth fighters.
Yeah.
The ones designed to be practically invisible to radar, and their heavy-hitting F-15I Ram strike aircraft.
And the outcome, as we said, was pretty shocking, wasn't it? Iran's air defense network. I mean, what do they primarily rely on?
Well, mainly their domestically developed Bavar 373 system. It's their pride and joy in many ways. And they have a limited number of older Russian S-400 PMU-2 systems.
Okay, so not the latest Russian tech, but still something.
Something, but apparently not enough. The reports suggest the network was just overwhelmed. The operation actually started with special forces disabling radar installations on the ground.
Clearing the path.
Exactly. Clearing the path for precision airstrikes using advanced munitions. Think satellite-guided bombs, JDAMs, things that hit with pinpoint accuracy.
So without those advanced systems, like the S-400 we mentioned, Israeli aircraft basically had, well, a much easier time exploiting gaps in Iran's defenses.
You're absolutely right. They operated deep inside Iranian airspace, apparently with minimal resistance. Key nuclear sites like Natanz and Fordo reportedly hit hard. Iran's air defenses significantly degraded.
And the really stark point, no Israeli F-35 was verified as downed, despite some initial chatter from, local Iranian sources maybe.
Right. That lack of verified shootdowns speaks volumes about the effectiveness of the Israeli approach and maybe the limitations of Iran's defenses against that specific threat.
Which brings us back to the S-400. If it was so critical, what stopped Iran getting it earlier, before this crisis? Was it purely Russia saying no, or were there other factors, maybe things Iran isn't shouting about?
That's a great question, because the public outcry now, like from the former Deputy Speaker Ali Motahari on June 30th, he squarely blames Russia.
Yeah, I saw that. He basically said Moscow chose its relationship with Israel over supporting Tehran.
Pretty much. It really highlights this growing frustration in Tehran. Makes you wonder, why was Iran left so exposed right when they needed these defenses most?
Okay, so to get that, we really need to understand this S-400 Triumph system, the game changer Iran couldn't get. What makes it so special?
Well, it's developed by Russia's Almaz-Antey, and it is genuinely considered one of the world's most advanced long-range air defense systems. We're talking capability to engage targets out to 400 kilometers.
400 kilometers, that's huge range.
Huge range, and high altitude too, up to 30 kilometers. It basically creates this massive protective bubble. It can engage all sorts of targets, including stealth aircraft like the F-35, long before they get close.
And it uses different types of missiles.
Right, multiple missile types, including the 40N6E, which is specifically for those very long-range shots. And its radar, the 91N6E Gravestone, is known to be very robust, very good at detecting even low observable stealthy targets.
Okay, so contrast that with Iran's main system, the Bavar 373. You said it's a significant domestic achievement, which it is.
Absolutely it is. A big step for their industry. But its reported range is roughly half that of the S-400. maybe around 200 kilometers.
Okay.
And crucially, its radar systems just don't seem to have the same level of sophistication as the S-400s, especially when you're talking about tracking advanced stealth aircraft. Even their Russian-purchased resonance and air radar reportedly underperformed.
Overwhelmed by electronic warfare, perhaps.
That's what some reports suggest, yeah. Israel puts a lot of emphasis on electronic attack capabilities.
So what here for the listener? It's just how massive a difference this one piece of tech, the S-400, could have made. Is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. Had Iran managed to get the S-400 deployed, its ability to detect and engage those Israeli aircraft at much longer ranges, it could have completely changed the calculus for Operation Rising Lion.
How so?
Yeah.
What would Israel have had to do differently?
Well, they likely would have had to rely much more, maybe exclusively, on standoff weapons launching missiles from outside the S-400's engagement range. Or, if they did penetrate, they'd risk far greater losses. It fundamentally changes the risk assessment.
But as we hinted, this wasn't Russia's first time being hesitant with Iran on big arms deals, was it? There's a history here.
Oh, absolutely, a long history. You have to go back to the 90s and 2000s. Iran repeatedly tried to buy the S-300 system, the predecessor to the S-400.
Right.
There was actually a contract signed in 2007 for the S-300 PMU-1, but Russia canceled it in 2009. Pressure. Lots of pressure from Western countries and significantly from Israel. That cancellation is actually what really pushed Iran to develop its own Bavar 373, kind of out of necessity.
So they only got some S-300s much later.
Much later. It wasn't until 2017 that Russia finally delivered a limited number of a slightly different version, the S-300 PMU-2, after years of delay and legal wrangling.
Okay, so the S-400 story follows a similar pattern then. Promises or signals, but no delivery.
Eerily similar. Look, Russia and Iran worked more closely together in Syria from the mid-2010s. Russian officials definitely made noises about being open to supplying the S-400. They talked about it.
But no deal.
No deal materialized. Even as recently as, June 23rd, 2025, just before this latest crisis really boiled over, the Kremlin was publicly saying they'd supply the S-400 based on Iran's needs.
Yeah.
Nothing. It wasn't there when needed.
And what's also interesting is the apparent contradiction from Iran itself, right? You mentioned their defense minister, Ashtiani.
Yeah, back in March 2023, he publicly downplayed the need for the S-400. He asserted that their Bavar 373 was sufficient, that it could handle threats.
Well, the recent attacks certainly put that claim to the test, didn't they?
They cast a huge shadow on it, yes. Makes those earlier statements look, well, perhaps overly optimistic or maybe politically motivated at the time.
And that feeds right into this sense of betrayal that Motahari voiced. His specific point really hits home, doesn't it?
It does. He pointed out, look, Russia sold S-400s to Turkey, a NATO member, and offered them to Saudi Arabia, but withheld them from Iran.
Iran, which has been supplying Russia with crucial drone tech, the Shaheds, for its war in Ukraine.
Exactly. Motahari's quote was quite direct. Russia's refusal to sell S-400 systems and failure to deliver Su-35 jets to Iran, despite the support Iran provided, highlight Moscow's lack of willingness to back Tehran.
That doesn't sound like just disappointment. That sounds like real strategic frustration, like questioning the whole basis of the partnership.
It absolutely does. It suggests Moscow might be prioritizing short-term diplomatic flexibility, keeping lines open with Israel, over cementing a deeper, more reliable defense relationship with Tehran. It really exposes the limits of that alliance.
Which brings us squarely to Russia's whole strategy in the Middle East. This delicate balancing act, it's often called multi-line diplomacy, right?
That's the term often used.
Yeah.
Because Iran is a critical partner for Moscow, especially now, providing those ballistic missiles and Shahed-136 drones for Ukraine. That's undeniable.
But
Israel remains a very significant regional player, and one with historically close ties to the United States, even if those ties have complexities.
And that's the core of the dilemma for Russia, isn't it? Giving Iran the S-400, that would massively upset Israel.
Massively. It could drastically escalate tensions, maybe even risk drawing Russia into a direct confrontation, which is something they almost certainly want to avoid, especially while bogged down in Ukraine.
We saw their reaction to the Israeli strikes, didn't we? They used words like alarming, dangerous.
Yes, diplomatic condemnation. But crucially, Moscow stopped short of offering any direct military help to Tehran during the actual attacks.
So if you step back and look at the big picture, what does this tell us about Russia's priorities?
Well, it really looks like Russia is prioritizing stability in its relationships with Israel, and maybe by extension the U.S., over going all in on military support for Iran. Concerns about how the S-400 might actually be used potentially against Israeli planes could definitely complicate Moscow's regional game plan.
But is there a risk for Russia here? They need partners too, given the situation in Ukraine. Could alienating Iran like this backfire long-term? Is this multi-line diplomacy sustainable if one line feels fundamentally betrayed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It highlights this real asymmetry in the relationship.
Yeah, that asymmetry strikes me too. Iran gives significant military aid to Russia for Ukraine.
Ballistic missiles, drones, game-changing stuff in that conflict.
And yet, when Iran needs top-tier air defense for its own territory, the answer is effectively no. How do we explain that?
It just throws into sharp relief how potentially lopsided this alliance might be. It fuels that resentment in Tehran and it raises serious questions. Does Moscow see Iran as a genuine strategic ally, or more like a convenient partner of circumstance?
Okay, let's shift focus to the internal situation in Iran, this air defense failure. It must have caused chaos internally.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Reports describe a firestorm of criticism. It's apparently worsening tensions that already existed between the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the civilian government.
How so? Where's the blame falling?
Well, the IRGC effectively oversees Iran's air defense network. So they're facing accusations of, mismanagement, maybe overconfidence in the domestic Bavar 373 system.
Did
they push too hard for self-reliance at the expense of capability?
And the civilian government, under President Pezeshkian.
They're getting criticized too, but from a different angle, for failing diplomatically. Why couldn't they secure the S-400 deal with Russia? Why weren't relationships stronger?
So this internal blame game must be absolutely boiling in Tehran right now. Motahari's public comments seem like just the tip of the iceberg.
Very likely. His rebuke reflects wider discontent, and it puts the IRGC's dominance under intense scrutiny. You have some arguing, yes, the focus on domestic systems was national pride, but it left Iran vulnerable.
While others probably blame the civilian leaders for not being tougher negotiators or for not anticipating Russia's reluctance.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, like you said, what's Iran's next move? Do they double down on building their own stuff, or do they start looking elsewhere, maybe China?
Right. Could this actually reshape their whole defense policy, power dynamics shifting internally?
It really could. The IRGC might try to grab even more control over procurement, arguing only they understand the military needs.
Or the civilian government might push back, try to assert more authority, maybe push harder on diplomatic avenues with other potential suppliers. You mentioned China's HQ-9 system.
Yeah, that's often mentioned as a potential alternative. China is definitely positioning itself as a major arms supplier globally. This situation could be an opening for them.
This whole episode just underscores how utterly critical advanced air defense is in modern war, doesn't it? It's driving this global race for supremacy.
No question. Russia's S-400 set a benchmark. But its absence in Iran now raises big questions about its availability, even for supposed allies. Is it always conditional?
And the race continues. Russia's developing the S-500 supposedly for hypersonic threats.
Right, the next generation. Meanwhile, the U.S. keeps upgrading its systems aegis, learning from conflicts like this, integrating layers of defense.
And China, as you said, is pushing hard with its HQ-9 and looking towards things like the HQ-19. They clearly want a bigger piece of that market.
Definitely. It's a very competitive space, driven by these real-world demonstrations of capability or lack thereof.
And Israel's success here, tactically, it offers some pretty stark lessons for other countries too, wouldn't you say?
Crucial lessons, the importance of integration electronic warfare, special operations teams taking out radar, precision strikes. It's not just about having missiles. It's the whole system of systems approach to overcome modern defenses.
It's the ecosystem, not just the shooter.
Precisely. And for Iran specifically, this conflict highlights an urgent need. They need a denser, more integrated air defense network. Whether they can achieve that alone, or if they'll need significant foreign help, that's the big question now.
Especially given the contrast, right? They're very reliant on drones for offensive power, but seem quite vulnerable defensively.
That contrast is stark. It shows an unevenness in their military development and posture right now, exposed in some ways.
So wrapping this up, we've seen how Russia's refusal on the S-400 combined with this devastating Israeli air campaign has really shaken up the Middle East security landscape.
Dramatically reshaped it, yeah.
Iran seems weakened, certainly its air defenses are, and facing internal divisions. Its regional influence might be diminished.
While Israel has demonstrated, again, significant military prowess, solidifying its position.
And Russia's cautious approach, it really highlights the complexity, maybe the increasing difficulty of navigating this volatile region with that multi-line strategy.
It's a tightrope walk, and maybe the rope is fraying.
So the final thought here, the absence of the S-400 in Iran didn't just expose Tehran's vulnerabilities, it also casts serious doubt on how reliable strategic partnerships really are when the chips are down. What stands out to you listening to this? Does a nation's pride in its own defense industry, like Iran's Bavar 373, ultimately serve its best interests if it leaves them open to advanced threats?
Or is relying on allies, even close ones, always going to involve these tricky geopolitical calculations, where their interests might override yours at the critical moment?
As the Middle East keeps grappling with these shifts, that question hangs in the air for everyone, really. Can you ever truly strike that perfect balance between self-reliance and needing the best possible defense capabilities, often from partners, in this incredibly complex world?
Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to stay ahead of the biggest shifts in aerospace, geopolitics, and defense innovation.